The winner of the Orwell Prize for Political Writing for 2020 is Kate Clanchy for her book, Some Kids I Taught and What They Taught Me. Kate, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so moved and so grateful to receive this prize. These are the memoirs. One way of looking at this book is that it's the memories of a school teacher, and school teachers, as part of it says in the book, are not taken seriously in so many different ways, not taken seriously as politicians, and not taken seriously as intellectuals, and not taken seriously as artists. So for this to win the prize for political writing as art means so much to me, and I hope it will mean a lot to many teachers out there, because if maybe there's one thing the pandemic has taught us, is that teachers are very important and very necessary, and that schools are our communities. They're the things that can pull the community together, and without them we've ripped a big hole in our society, and we need that to be joined back together. So this is the prize of all prizes that I would have wanted, and I couldn't be more pleased. I'd just like to thank the judges. One of the reasons I wanted this prize was I thought the judges were so great, and I very much wanted your good opinions, and I'm so grateful to have them, all four of you. I want to thank my editor at Picador, Chris Doyle, and my agent, Zoe Baldy, who, goodness knows, they put up with quite a lot from me. I'm always changing what I'm doing. I started this book 10 years ago. When they signed me up for it, I don't think it looked very promising. They took a detour on the way to publish a book by my school children. They do everything for me, and I'm so glad that this has come through for them. I'm really glad. I know at this point that quite a lot of writers say that they're going to give the money away. I'm not actually going to say that, because I do quite a lot of self-funded projects, and I will be carrying on my work working with young people, and this will definitely help. But I think it's also, this award also says to me that my writing is important, and my words on the page and my art, and I'm going to spend this £3,000 on my writing and spending some time doing some of that, and I'm also extremely grateful for that. So thank you again. Thank you so much. Well,
it's very good, and I appreciate you being honest and saying this was a prize that you wanted to win. Most people wouldn't be so straightforward about it. I think it's excellent. I mean, you mentioned that the Orwell Prize is given to a book that fulfills Orwell's ambition of making political writing into an art. And when I look through the notes of the judges right through the process, they're remarkably similar, even though, as you will have seen, the four judges come from very different places intellectually. Everyone uses the words moving, deeply affecting, love the voice, brought tears to my eyes. At least two people said, someone said, reading it made me a better person. When you, it's probably debatable.
I don't know, but it's good if a book can do that. Yeah.
When you wrote it, did you think of it as an explicitly political undertaking? You wanted to change the world in writing it.
I want to change the world in teaching, and that's why I did it in the first place. I'm very idealistic, and I don't take any of that back. I mean, obviously I do fail to live up to my ideals on a daily basis, as we all do, but I've kept those ideas. And I do, the longer I've spent in teaching, the more political I see it. The more, I suppose, I've seen things change and then change back again, and I realise that political decisions at the top actually make much bigger differences than I might have thought, at the beginning. So, I've become more and more aware of it as a political profession.
Do you think, I mean, you don't have, I mean, you've got strong views about the policies that are doing harm and the things that work and don't work when it comes to teaching, but you don't have a particular prescription for teaching itself. You describe actually very good teachers who have very different approaches. Do you think it would change education policy? Do you think you need to actually change the policy or change our attitude to education?
Well, teaching in the UK has suffered from an awful lot of top-down initiatives. It's suffered from a lot of policy, and policy is always cheaper than change. So that people come in and say, well, if we just teach this way, and that happens at a kind of well, if you take government as the biggest macro level, but it also happens at the level of the academy trusts. So these trusts take over a chain of schools, and then they have to have something that they're doing, a policy that's going to change the schools. I mean, real change in teaching has to happen at a kind of micro level. So it has to be the happy teacher that can stay on at the school for an extra 3 years because they're being paid enough to, rent a flat and not a single room so they can get married. That kind of thing happens all the time, that teachers have to leave because they can't do that. Or the teacher is, the music teacher can stay on because they're being paid enough. They don't have to go and seek promotion doing something else. Those kind of micro things happen, and all of those micro things are expensive. The macro things are kind of cheaper. It's cheaper to say, our schools are going to be better because, what did Gavin Williamson say the other day? It'll be fine because they're all facing the front. So he's going to make a law. That doesn't cost anything to say that. It also doesn't make very much real change, except sometimes at the level of law, you get laws which are that superficial but do make real change. And the set of laws that Gove brought in are quite remarkably toxic. So they do things like change all this parsing and grammar at year 6. I can't really overstate how awful that is. And they've made big pointless rents into the curriculum for kind of policy levels. And so those kind of macro yet very superficial changes are very damaging. I think what you need is a lot more funding and a lot more sort of wholesale and responsibility and sort of micro changes, really.
On one point that all the judges made was about the quality of the writing. Of course, you are an award-winning poet along with the teaching, and there's the writer's eye for detail. I mean, I very quickly gave this book to my son to read, and I had started underlining the things I thought were really just great use of language and that telling detail that can bring a page alive. And there were too many in the end, and I thought I would seemingly encourage him to sort of, deface books. So I gave up. But you make the point, which I have to admit I've not ever really thought about, which was how quickly we end up having to give up creative writing. But it's such a big part of our English lessons in the first years of our school, and certainly primary school, and then it just disappears and you can't pursue it. You have to pursue, as you say, when you do continue with English A level, you're only being forced into this kind of critical mode. What do you think is lost from that? And do you think the fact that all the creative writing that has happened almost of necessity since the pandemic, do you think there's a chance that we are now getting a new appreciation of just the importance of words from an educational standpoint?
There's really interesting things happening in the pandemic with young people in writing. There's a lot of poetry happening, in so many ways, they do present themselves through writing more than they ever have in the history of the world. The current teenagers sitting there, they write more words every single day than any teenagers ever. And I've got no idea what's going on. I do know that poetry, there isn't the same barrier that there used to be. There's TikTok poems, there's Instagram poems, there's Twitter poems all over the place. And, of course, they vary in quality, and some of them are very terrible, but a lot of Victorian balladry was also very terrible. That's been consumed on quite a large level, and people do respond to that. And so certainly more poetry is being written than ever. I find that I find the way that we don't teach creative writing, and that's an example of a macro reform actually that's really, in the last 5 years, the Gove reforms have cut in creative writing, even at primary school level. And it's such a shame. But most people instinctively want to write. It's like most people want to sing. And they should be allowed. And they don't have to do it. People should be allowed to sing in a choir. Gareth Malone showed us that. People should be allowed to do some writing. It doesn't have to be the best writing ever, but it's so much easier to engage children in creative writing. But again, it's an ideological thing. It's easier to say, oh, well, creative writing is all a bit silly and wet, and we can't grade it very easily, and we can't give good marks for it, so let's not do it. That's kind of cheaper than it is to be humane and take the time and have the faith and creativity. I do wish we did.
I mentioned at the start how the fact of the pandemic, we were probably just as we were reaching the shortlisting phase was when we went into lockdown, and it didn't change how we felt about the sort of quality of the books, but it clearly changed the resonance and change the environment in which we were thinking about them. And especially when we're thinking about a winner, you obviously want a book that is resonant for this time as well as standing the test of time. I should ask you, obvious question, but the schools and pupils that you've been involved with over the years, how have they been managing since March?
Well, the alternative provision unit where I was teaching had to close down completely because they couldn't. I mean, you know, I know there are places for the
since the lockdown.
Yeah. The theory is that there's places for vulnerable children, but in practice, it's those vulnerable children that find it the most difficult to turn up. But I gathered around me a group of my former students, and this has been rather glorious because it's not been with the school or anything. We just did it entirely for fun. Well, entirely for fun is a superficial word, for joy. My former students, some of them are graduates now, some of them are still in their last years at school, and we just got together on Zoom twice a week and wrote poems. And they've been through a lot. They've suffered a lot, especially 16, 17-year-olds. To say you can't touch anybody when you're 17, I mean, it's very impractical for a start. I'm not in the least surprised that there are illegal raves, that there is a feeling of revolution now. It's an astonishing thing to do to a whole population. Yes, we've written a book. It's called Unmute. It's their poems.
One of the reasons your book felt like it was particularly resonant was this sense that so many things have come to the surface in this pandemic. And actually, Robert Macfarlane in the Underland book, which is also on the shortlist, he has a concept of an unburial. When things by climate change actually unburies things that had been buried deep in the ocean, deep in the ground, and it feels like quite a lot has been unburied by COVID. All of these things, some of which are described in your book. The challenges and the lack of support for large chunks of the population. Do you think all of that we're now so newly aware of, and we talk about the importance of essential workers and all of that, do you think it's going to stay in the open now? We're going to stay more aware and actually act on it, or is it all going to sink back into the ground once the crisis has passed?
I just don't know. The thing about excluded students and school in general, it's very messy. It's very difficult to kind of get data. I mean, that's one reason why school inclusion people are always having new initiatives. It's because they want instant result. They don't get one. Everything is longer term. And I think some things we're undercovering is years of austerity and what's happened. And there's this big gap between the state and the private schools. It's going to get so much bigger. And the thing that really always concerns me about arts and schools, I mean, they've just said this week that in order to catch up on the GCSEs next year, they'll probably be, getting rid of art and French. I mean, where are we going next with that? I don't know. I mean, students in the inclusion unit, some of them will have disappeared. It's going to take social services ages to even find them. And when it comes to the point of view of remaining in the political consciousness, those are things very, very tough to keep them in the political consciousness because they're so kind of messy and boring apart from anything else. We've lost a whole load of very difficult children. Who cares? Some people care, but it's very difficult to keep caring. So I don't know. Is this government going to enormously invest in schools and inclusion units and the arts? I don't think so. And I don't think without that investment you can get real micro level change, but I hope so. I mean, you have to keep out there, keep trying.
Well, I guess we should record that this is the week where they have coughed up a certain amount for the arts. So let's see.
They have coughed up for the arts.
We shall see. Yes, we shall see what happens. You're absolutely right about the numbers. What the economists always say: what counts counts. What you count counts. And
that's right.
So often, I have to push against this tendency not to look at things or not to consider research to be really high quality research if it doesn't have this lots and lots of numbers attached. And as you say, some of the most important stuff is incredibly hard to capture.
Very hard. I always found that working with inclusion pupils, you'd get, they would have written some good poems. They would have come to school most days. They would not have knifed somebody, but those things do not, they still got an F in their GCSEs, or they ran away from the GCSEs, and your results still look bad. They still, and then that creates awful economic, data creates awful problems like off-rolling, where kids are just removed from the system. So I don't know. I think there may be lots of impossible sums out there.
Well, what is fantastic about your book is that all of those what often are rather boring details of the impact of educational policies, you absolutely bring alive with those stories that just so really stay with you, and certainly stayed with all the judges. And I hope that by giving you the prize, we can also make sure a few other people read it.
There will be some more stories. Yes.
Kate Clarkey, winner.
Thank you so very, very much.
2020 Orwell Prize for Political Writing. Thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.